Welcome to the Battle Buddy Podcast with Keith McKeever.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Battle Buddy Podcast. I have a good friend, Elisa Escalante, here with me. We met in Clubhouse, what seems like forever ago. Don't exactly know when that was, but we've had so many conversations, and you've had rooms with LJ talking about your book, which is exactly what we're going to talk about today. But I kind of want to open with something that I didn't tell you a couple minutes ago when we were kind of chatting before this, but there's something I wrote down in the very beginning of reading your book that has kind of stuck with me, and I'm going to read it so I don't mess it up. When you are forced to find peace in chaos and suffering, you will be chaotic even in peace. You can take the human out of the nightmare, but the nightmare is still in them. I don't know where you got that or if you came up with that with yourself, but it is brilliant. I love it. It makes so much sense. And literally, if I remember right, that was like very early in the book, but it stuck with me enough to write that down in my notes.
Yeah, I think it's actually, and I did write that quote. I know I started every chapter with a quote, and some of the quotes I wrote specifically for the chapter, while many of the quotes I'd written before I even wrote the book, and I was just searching through my quote page and finding what applied, most appropriately. And I think that was the therapy in a war zone chapter, I believe.
Very well could have been. I know it was right there in the beginning because that was like right after I got access to you gave me a copy of the book after pre-ordering it, which is now available for purchase on Amazon, by the way. But go ahead and tell us about yourself and your book.
Thank you. Well, I'm Elisa, Air Force veteran. I worked as a mental health technician for 6 years, active duty. I had a deployment to Afghanistan in 2012, where I was working in a combat stress clinic. After I got out, I decided to become a social worker in New York City, and the VA hired me. Specifically, I worked at a vet center. And for those that don't know, the eligibility is either combat vet or military sexual trauma. And I had done that for 3.5 years. Recently resigned earlier this year, and I'm about to start a new research position for the Air Force. So I'm excited about that as well. Research for Air Force suicides specifically. And that's where I'm at right now. And the book launch date, officially it was yesterday. So I'm still, I'm excited and I'm nervous. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's the title of your book is Unseen, Uncovering Invisible Wounds. I think I got that right off the top of my head here. But you gave me access after I pre-ordered it months ago, and I read through it, and I was just telling you a few minutes ago, just kind of rereading through it, and there's so many parts that it's amazing, when you have PTSD and you read through it and you're like, aha, okay, cool, that's me, or that's somebody I know. I see these things, you recognize it. But like I told you a few minutes ago, the really important thing that I noticed are right towards the end of the book, right towards the end of part 3, right before you kind of go into resources and stuff like that, your forward section, I think it is, wow, this is beneficial. And this is a must read. And I say, I've got it on my website under the, reading list on battlebuddypodcast.net. But this is not just a must read for veterans. This is an absolute, I repeat, absolute must read for anybody living with a veteran with PTSD.
Yes.
I think it's even more powerful for the wives, the husbands, the daughters, the sons, the parents, the boyfriends, girlfriends, whatever, whoever you are. If you're connected to somebody in the military community, military veteran, whatever, that has PTSD, this is hands down the read you need to, because you found a way to make it understandable in like bite-sized nuggets, because none of the chapters are obsessively long. You're a licensed clinical social worker, but it's not like a medical journal.
Right.
I've never read medical journals because that's definitely not my degree path, but I can tell you the business ones are dry sometimes. I can only imagine the medical ones. But, you just wrote it from a totally different perspective, through your eyes, through your opinions, through the conversations you've had with probably hundreds or thousands of service members, and it's brilliant. So thank you. Thank you for writing it. and I have no doubt it's going to be helpful for so many people.
Yeah, I definitely steered clear of using too much heavy psychological terms. I didn't want to go for that because we already have that. There's so many textbooks on PTSD. So I know, no, I don't have to sit here and, write for the millionth time what it is and the specific diagnosis and all the symptoms. There's so many things that cover that. I wanted to give a unique perspective, but something that was relatable and simpler to read. And you're right in that family members or anyone that's connected to a vet, it's going to be helpful to them too, because as a veteran, we understand we're suffering. We may not be able to put like words to it all the time, but we know what we feel. And the family members don't, so for them on the outside looking at us, it's confusing. Like there's a lot of unanswered questions. And like I talk about in the book, we're not necessarily saying these things out loud or, talking about how we're suffering. So they're going to be very confused. What they see is the behaviors. So I think that this, yeah, is definitely going to answer a lot of questions for people.
I think it definitely will. And like I told you a few minutes ago, I'm going to pass this on to my family members.
Yeah.
Because not just my wife, but
Mhm.
other family members that I have in my family who are living with veterans, who could really, who are not veterans themselves, so might open up some ideas, might look at situations a little differently, might recognize some certain things. I certainly hope so. But let's back up a little bit to all the way back when you enlisted, 18, right?
Yes, 12 days after high school graduation.
You didn't waste any time. So did you choose the mental health career field? Was that, or did you land in it? I know you had some issues in your life growing up. I didn't know if that was something that you purposely chose or if it just kind of fell in your lap there.
Well, it's funny because before I enlisted, I remember having like these torn moments where I was like, do I want to be a psychologist or do I want to go in the Air Force? That was like one of my little torn moments when I was a teenager, like thinking about what do I want to do. And then I found out, oh, I can enlist in the military and be in the mental health field. That's pretty awesome. But I did take a risk and I went in open general because there I wanted to like start as soon as possible. So the recruiter just told me bring some certificates and some letters of recommendation from your teachers, and then maybe you'll get the mental health field if you're lucky. So I, I went in there with that knowledge and I requested mental health, week 5 of boot camp. And I did what the recruiter said because I was a peer mediator in high school. So I would help kids resolve like conflicts and stuff. It was just something I, did, I volunteered for. And then I got it. And then when I started tech school and I started learning about mental health, it just felt like the right fit immediately.
That's incredible. I think you should go buy, like, as soon as we're done today, you should go to the store and buy some lottery tickets because you might be like the luckiest person in the world who have
I
in
know.
high school been interested in that and got good advice from a recruiter that actually paid off, and you still went open general and got what you needed. Because I was
Man,
security forces. I think we've talked about this probably many times. Like,
yes.
darn near anybody I knew who goes in the Air Force open general is going to end up a cop. You're either going to end up working gates or flipping burgers. Sorry to the
Exactly.
services folks. Hey, I appreciate y'all handing out towels in the gym and everything, but
Yeah.
like, let's just be honest. That's what the that's just what the Air Force does. Like, we always need people to flip burgers and hand out towels and work gates.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that you should seriously go buy a lottery ticket for crying out loud.
I don't win, but
You don't win. Well,
more
I hate to say it, you might have used all your luck. All the luck you had in your life, you might have already used it. So, so when you were serving, how difficult was it for you being in the mental health field, knowing that there was this stigma? Every career field had it. I know mine did. Especially being security forces, you're carrying a weapon. First thing they tell you, well, like when I came back from my first deployment was don't go talk to mental health. They're going to take your weapon away. And when you carry a weapon every single day and that's part of your job and your identity and the culture of your unit, that peer pressure, and it's not always peers, higher ups and everything too, it plants the seed in your mind like you can't go, like there's no way, like and it just reinforces and strengthens this society as Americans against mental health counseling. So like how difficult was that being in a career field that you have passion for and kind of combating this constantly, people not really wanting to go?
Yeah, I think in mental health, they teach us to respect self-determination a lot. So it really means accepting that, it's voluntary and people are either going to want to go or they're not. It doesn't necessarily mean that those that are not going don't need it. It's just that they have to be there. They have to be in that place in their life where they've decided, I'm open to getting help. Like, this isn't working for me. Because if you don't have them in that place, therapy just becomes pointless. It's going to be counterproductive. It's going to waste their time. So we want people to show up voluntarily. And if they still have, the reservations against going, then they're not ready to be a client just yet. So we accept that. But the area where I really got to destigmatize a lot was actually when I was in Afghanistan, because we got to do walkabouts. You know what that is, walkabout, but I'll explain it further. Like, it's literally just walking around the fob and talking to you guys. And that's where I really got to destigmatize mental health. Because, yeah, everyone's kind of laughing at you saying, oh, you work in mental health. Oh, that's for crazy people or whatever. Or like, no, I would never go there, blah, blah, blah. I would never talk to people. But before you know it, they're talking to me for like an hour or an hour and a half. And then they're venting and they're telling me what's hard about the deployment. But because it's not in a therapy office, instead it's just outside, near their work section, or we're like sitting on a bench, they don't realize that, hey, you're actually getting therapy right now and you don't even realize it.
Yeah, I was just thinking, I mean, it's either in a neutral environment or a positive, comfortable environment for them.
Yeah. And then they realized, oh, talking to this person wasn't so bad, and it really wasn't. And then they're more likely to come to your office later and talk to you again because you built that rapport with them. So outreach was always the easiest way for me to destigmatize, because once I have a conversation with someone, then they realize, okay, it's not so bad to go get help. Like, this person isn't judging me or, looking at me like I'm crazy because I'm telling them these things. I'm helping normalize some of those emotions that, came with being in a combat zone.
Yeah, there certainly is a lot more emotions and thoughts, and you can go up and down of that roller coaster, real quick. And I guess I should just stop and take a time out before we kind of get into the book or go any further, and just for anybody watching or listening at any point in time, now or in the future, you are a licensed clinical social worker, but we're on a podcast here. We're not doing any counseling here, and this is about your book and just kind of general conversation. But I think we should throw out a little bit of a trigger warning, because I don't know where things will go and things might pop up. So, if somebody, hears something or whatever and it starts to trigger you, go get help, talk to somebody, turn this off if you need to. I hate to say it as a podcaster, but if it starts to trigger you, turn it off, do whatever you got to do to take care of yourself, self-care first. And then call whoever you need to call to, get yourself right back on the right path, because at the end of the day, we want you here tomorrow instead of not here tomorrow. So, but that's you have a unique perspective, and I love your new job too with research in the Air Force. Might be kind of biased to it being Air Force as well, but I know the career field I was in averages probably 10, 12 suicides a year that I see on Facebook when people are posting the badge, with the black band on it. And that's what I see. somebody's been out for 10 years. So I'm sure the number is much higher, especially from the veteran population of the career field that we don't hear about. And so you have a very unique perspective of being an Air Force veteran. You were in the mental health field there, and now you're doing the research. So I applaud you for applying for the job, and congrats on getting it, and all the success that you'll have. We got to get this number lowered. The numbers, regardless of branch, is too much. So,
absolutely. I was informed. I was informed when I was active duty that security forces did have the highest suicide rate when I was in, and that was 2008 to 2014, and perhaps it's still the same. That it has the highest rate, but I remember that, and security forces, and then aircraft maintenance, I believe, was number 2.
Doesn't surprise me. I know I can't speak for maintenance, but I'm sure there's a lot of pressure, to keep planes flying and keep them maintained. Security forces, there was definitely a lot of pressure because I was in 06 to 2011, and the first couple of years I was in until the war in Iraq kind of wrapped up. We're supporting 2 wars. Every air base needs cops. That's why it's the largest career field in the Air Force. But the operations tempo at one point in time was almost 6 months home, 6 months gone. And I knew guys that had been doing that, somehow sustaining that for 5 or 6 years. And it's like, that's a lot of deployment time. That's not enough downtime back home, when the rest of the Air Force, because I know you were in for like 4 years before you deployed. I knew people that had almost done an entire career in the middle of 2 wars and never deployed. I knew people that were fighting in their career fields really hard to get a deployment.
Yeah.
And here we had no choice. It was like 6 months gone, 6 months back. I did almost 8 months on my first deployment with an extension because it was an 07 and the surge. Got back a few months later, they're sending me on not a deployment, definitely not a deployment, but a long 6-month TDY in South America, which definitely was not as dangerous. There was some danger down there, potential danger with the drug cartels and everything. And then I got back at PCS to Scott Air Force Base, and the chief when I met the chief, she's like, how do you feel about deploying? And I told her, I said, I know how much time I have left in, and I know it's enough time for one more deployment. So with all due respect, ma'am, I don't care if you send me now or you send me 6 months from now. I know you're going to send me somewhere. Doesn't matter to me where. I knew how the game was. And she was like, "Okay, do you mind going now?" I said, "That's fine." So they threw me out of deployment, and I went to Blod for 6 months. So
yeah, you've done a lot. It's just like one deployment is more than enough, but like people that have multiple deployments, it's just insane. And like working in Afghanistan with, because I was on an Army FOB, so I was my clients were mostly soldiers, and a lot of them had gone to Iraq before Afghanistan also. So it was really interesting to hear their stories, from Iraq, and then talking about how Afghanistan may have been re-triggering some of the trauma that they already had from their first deployment. And, it's just so much, often wondering how much can one person really, really take, but that really, it wears and tears on people.
Yeah, I know. When I was in, they were, let's see, in 07, I think it was early in that deployment, the Army had made the decision like 6 months, maybe 6 months or a year before that, to go from 12-month deployments to like 15 months. Then they extended everybody to like 18. And it's like, wow, that's ridiculous. By comparison, in the Vietnam War, most guys were there for 12 months, maybe a couple of days short, maybe a couple of days longer, whatever, but about 12 months. And most guys, it was kind of a one and done. Some guys would go back a second time. A few people went back a handful of times. But to do 18 months and then come home and then probably be right back out the door for another deployment, maybe a year later.
Yeah,
that's not enough time to decompress.
I work with some people like the pattern we're talking about, depending on their career field, but it'd be like a year deployed, and then a year back home, and then a year deployed, and then a year back home, and then a year deployed again. And sometimes some of them had said it was all Afghanistan, and they were really starting to feel like that was their primary home at that point. Because when you're like just shifting between two worlds and it's 50-50, it was just like that became their home versus actual home. And I don't know, it was just kind of wild.
That is wild, because I mean, I had times, honestly, and you kind of hit on it in the book a little bit, that some people just feel more comfortable in that combat environment. Now, both my deployments, I was young and single, so I didn't have I mean, I had my mother and my sister and that family, but I didn't have like a wife and kids at the time. And there was times where back at home station, I'm like, man, I just wish I was deployed. It's weird for people who've never deployed, because everything's so simple. And so it may seem like a complex world. You got all these parties and movements and combat and not combat and all these things going on around you, but it's actually simple. It's really, really simple. War is hell. It's disgusting. It's disturbing. We all have a little different piece of the pie of why we're there and what we do and what we see and experience, but it's hell. But at the same time, it's simple. I was young and single. I had no bills, nothing. I had no wife. I mean, I would call home and talk to my mother every now and then, or my stepdad, or my sister, or whatever. But life was simple. There was no cares. It was literally every day. What do I got to do today to make it till tomorrow? All these things in the civilian world you got to think of: bills and medical stuff and this and that, and telemarketers calling you and stuff like that. You don't have to worry about it. It was simple. What do I have to do today to live till tomorrow? What is my mission? What is my goals? Everything is like laid out for you. You're trained. Everybody around you is trained. It's just such a simple world in so many ways. It's in so many other ways it's complex, but I know you know what I'm talking about, and so many other people, and you just kind of yearn for that simplicity, even though it's dangerous or inherently dangerous.
Yeah, I often tell people the story about how I had one of my most euphoric moments, in Afghanistan, where I'm just sitting on a swing. I don't even remember the name of the fob because I traveled a lot, because combat stress isn't everywhere. So we traveled a lot. And I just remember sitting on a swing, drinking the first cup of coffee I had in months, and just feeling the happiest I'd ever felt in my life. But in a combat zone. And I'm like, what is this? And it's strange and it's surreal. And yet it was like one of the most at peace moments I've ever felt. And there was definitely attacks, that happened on my base, like before that. And like you said, what you're saying, I've definitely heard a lot of people describe, and I relate to it, that it's scary and dangerous at times, and yet the most simple life can ever be, because it's you have a mission, do that, do that mission, and don't forget to also take care of yourself in some way, shape, or form, so that you're able to keep doing that mission, and all the rest of life's burdens need to be off of you. Whatever's going on back home needs to be off of you. And so some of the people that struggled the most, like the family thing, it's hit or miss, because I've seen some people, they've got their family support system, like their spouse and kids back home, and it gives them some hope, and it gives them something to kind of think about. It gets them through it. But then you have those cases where the family back home is actually making it harder, the deployment harder, if they're argumentative, or they're trying to burden the troop with the drama that's going on back stateside. So I think most people have a story where they were at the USO talking on the phone, and then they heard someone next to them screaming at their spouse or whatever. Like, I mean, I know I heard a couple
I have
of those.
to dig back, but probably.
Yeah, the drama that's going on back home, and they're like, maybe it's good that I didn't get married before my deployment. I don't know.
Well, I know I still freaked out some of my family. I know there was multiple times where indirect fire was coming in, and I was sitting in the little shack there with the phones talking to my mother, and I remember, everybody's hitting the floor, and I just reach up and grab the phone and pull it down. And she said, "What's that sound?" I said, "Oh, it's just incoming rounds." Just like nonchalantly, because, another weird thing that happens in war is, and I remember I didn't feel this as much the second time going into Iraq because I knew it was a large base and large support structure. But the first time going in, man, that was just so many emotions in your mind. It was middle of the night. We were loading up on British Merlin helicopters because they would only fly at night. And that's when we were going in to Camp Buka, which was the prison camp I was being deployed to. But being 21 years old, going in your first deployment, about to step on a helicopter to fly into a combat zone, and then halfway through the flight, they fired off flares for some reason. I don't know if we were being shot at or if it was just the Brits trying to fuck with us. but you're sitting there and it's pitch black and all you've got is like a 3-day pack in your rifle, and they gave us like one magazine, and because we're only going a handful of miles into Iraq, but pitch black and helicopter blades, and you're just kind of soaking all of a sudden these flares fly off and you're like, what the fuck? Like, what is going on? What have I gotten myself into? The whole world just changed. And it was probably sometime before that, but definitely after that, you just get to the point where you're like, any day now, any second now could be the end of my life. And that is a weird place for a human brain to be, to just be like weirdly okay with dying. Not suicidal, but you're just weirdly okay with the idea that you just might die in the next second. Now, on my second deployment, we had a guy, security forces. He was part of the off-base patrols, and it was near our armory. But I guess he had forgotten something in the Humvee, and they had him staged and the doors open and the body armor hanging on, whatever. I guess the guy was just walking through the parking lot. I didn't know the guy, but he was walking through the parking lot, and somebody off base had fired some AK rounds in the air, celebratory fire. Well, what goes up must come down. Dude's just walking through the parking lot and gets whacked with one round right into his left arm.
Oh, damn.
You know what I mean? And like after that moment, you're like, wow, what are the odds that one bullet came, and if he would have been stepped, 4 inches to the left,
yeah,
he'd have been goner.
Yep.
And things like that just kind of get you thinking. You're like, shit. Your life is fragile, and weird things can happen, at a moment's notice, and that's the weird reality of war. And then you just kind of brush it off. You're like, wow, it sucks to be him. Glad he's okay. We had a world-class hospital there. He was taken care of immediately. I don't know the guy, but I know he was fine. I'm sure he was surprised, extremely surprised. And one heck of a way to get a Purple Heart, I guess. But but it's definitely one of those things. It's like, wow, all kinds of crazy things can happen to you. And you got to be okay with dying.
Yeah, and you're also speaking on, I'd say some unconditional acceptance of what war is, but you're also speaking on intellectualization. And that was something that I also wrote about in the chapter titled War Zone Adaptation, where there's specific defense mechanisms that we must use in order to survive that type of environment. And intellectualization is one of the ones I mentioned. And an example would be me often saying to myself, statistically, I'm more likely to die in the US in a car crash than I am to die in Afghanistan. And that was something that I said to myself, and it always seemed to calm my nerves. And other like little examples would be, I hear a bomb go off, and I'd say to myself, well, I heard it, so I'm still alive. So I'm all right, like incoming. And toward the end of my deployment, it became so normal that when I'd hear bombs and then, they say shelter in place, I got to a point where I'm like, fuck that. I want to take a shower. And I just walked to the shower in my PT gear, and that's not smart or good, but I got to that point, and and then I had the best shower of my life because I was the only one in there in the
and
hot
nobody was
water.
going to yell at you for not taking a combat shower, right? I did the same thing actually. I felt the same way about incoming fire on my first deployment, but I had a strange go down a rabbit hole of a story here. My second deployment at Balad. I guess I'll back up. My first deployment at Camp Buka, we lived in these like trailers, and it was like 10 people crammed in there. There was gear everywhere. And I had some pretty good roommates, even though they were on the opposite shift. So I had to learn how to fall asleep with the lights on. There's no way to block those bulbs out, but you get used to certain things, right? So that second deployment comes around, and I've got a room that's probably twice as big. There's the same number of bunk beds in there, but there's only 4 of us. And the other 3 guys are all like brand new airmen first class. First deployment. Both of them have been, at that point I had boots that had been in the, being worn longer than they had been in the Air Force. And I'm walking back from somewhere and I hear it incoming. I hear the C-Rams go off. I hear a couple of explosions and I'm just walking and I see all these people kind of diving in the bunkers. And I'm having the same thought, like, fuck it. Didn't hit me. I'm not dead. I knew where I was at and I could kind of judge from the distance. And of course, at a big air base like that, obviously all the incoming rounds are trying to hit the aircraft. We were a stone's throw away from them, but it was off in the distance and I knew it. And so I go walk back to my room and 2 of my roommates are in there, like under their beds, literally shaking. It's the first time they've been shot at. And the one looks up at me and he goes, "Why aren't you taking cover?"
Yeah.
I said, "I heard it explode. It's all good. It already blew up. If it didn't blow up, EOD will get the ones that didn't." And, and I mean, he's just shaking. I mean, just his eyes are bulging out of his head. And so he goes, "What should I do?" I said, "Well, you can stay under your bed. You can get out from your bed and throw your gear on if it makes you feel any better. Or you can kind of go about your day in the room here because it's probably over with." He goes, "What are you going to do?" And I had a PlayStation and I bought a TV off somebody. I pulled out my little folding chair, kicked my feet up, turned on the PlayStation. I said, "I'm going to play some video games." And I'll be darned if both of them didn't stay under their bed until the all clear. And it was just like one of those moments. It's like I look back on it and I'm like, I should have just hung out in the bunker for the extra 10 minutes or whatever. Yeah. But I just didn't care. I just kind of just quickly assessed the situation and said, okay, it exploded over there somewhere. I heard it. By the time the C-Ram goes off and the alarm goes off, they already been shot. And if I've heard the explosion, they've already landed. Mm-hmm. So, unless there's a second round coming in, I'm probably pretty good.
Exactly.
And I know that feeling and that story is definitely not unique to me. I'm sure there's been other people who have versions of that story. I think we all do it to some extent. You see some people dive and some people are just like, yeah, well, yeah. I'll just take what happens.
An example of, you've like that defense mechanism, like you definitely had it in practice and very clearly practiced it well. And, that's your second deployment too. And I don't know, I'm just laughing because I'm thinking they must have been looking at you like you were a lunatic or something.
Like I was nuts. Like I was out of my mind, I mean, and I was a senior airman. They were all brand like I said, brand new airmen. They had to have been looking at me like, this guy's either nuts or he's brave as shit. Well, neither one. I just didn't care. You know what I mean? Like it.
Numbing, desensitized. But it's like, the brain is just so fascinating because it will do these things for us. And, we're not even necessarily consciously aware that that's happening. It just becomes the norm. And yet that is definitely very sophisticated defense mechanisms that your brain was doing for you to get through like a war zone environment. And then that was your second one. So your brain just shifted into that mode probably immediately when you got there, because, I mean, your body and your mind knew what it takes already, to get.
Yes. Like fight or flight response, right? Anything, something happens, right? You only have 2 basic responses. And it's weird, like looking back, and as you kind of mentioned that, it's like, okay, where did that fall in? Where on that line of fight or flight, did that, just not giving a shit, those defense mechanisms, where did that fall? Because I wasn't running away and trying to hide and protect myself, but I sure as heck, obviously couldn't really fight back, so it's kind of weird. I don't know if it's on that end, go down that, but
yeah. So much. See, the people that were talking to you, the people that were under the bed, they were in the fight or flight mode. You were in, like I said, a more sophisticated defense mechanism in your mind, that you were more conditioned. And I've noticed that especially with redeployers, people that have multiple deployments, they're more conditioned to it and they have more mature responses um, to the war zone because they've been there already. And, maybe, on some level, you don't want to waste your mental energy, um, dealing with those fears because you already know what the outcome might be. Like you said, you were you were intellectualizing that situation um, really well.
It's not like, I'll throw a sports analogy in there. It's kind of like what they talk about with like NFL quarterbacks, right? The first couple years they may be bad because everything is so fast. Like everything's being thrown at them really fast. They got to learn a bunch of things. They're seeing new things, right? Because everybody's bigger, stronger, faster in the NFL. But then they always talk about, the good quarterbacks eventually have that moment where everything slows down. They just see everything more clearly. They can react to things better. And I kind of just I think it's something kind of like that. You just see certain things and you can react to is it dangerous? Does that hurt me? Does it not hurt me? Like, what am I going to do? And then, do I want to put my energy into it? Because I had another thing happen on that deployment. I had an NCO that I worked with, and sometimes I was in the area where we check in the third country nationals that would come in with the biometrics tool sets and all that stuff and search their trucks. Sometimes I worked in air. Sometimes I was on the Humvee and we'd be out doing off-base patrol, perimeter checks and, covering convoys as they come in and all that kind of stuff. Well, we had an NCO. I'm definitely not going to name him, but he would let them walk around with 2 earbuds in. And he was the NCO that everybody thought was cool because he'd let them get away with anything. And this guy deployed multiple times, which always kind of surprises me, but that's why the story kind of comes up. So I had been mortared and rocketed so many times on my first deployment. Now, luckily, most of them weren't that close, but it happened almost on a weekly basis. I don't know where this guy had been, but we were on the perimeter of the base, convoys coming in and out. So you got big vehicles moving, you got potential threats everywhere. And I would pull these airmen to the side and I was like, hey, 1 earbud. Put in 1, because if you have 2 in and the music's too loud, you may not hear that engine, you may not hear the honk, and you may not hear the incoming. Mm-hmm. And it could save your life or your wingman, right? And I thought I was in the right. Man, I got my ass chewed like you wouldn't believe. You're just a senior airman. Don't you tell these other airmen what to do. That's literally what I got. And I was just like, okay, fine. That's on you.
Yeah.
I was just trying to just be like, I don't care if they listen to music in 1 earbud or, just 1. Because at the end of the day, I always felt like, okay, it's my life depends on it too. Yeah. Potentially. I mean, all kinds of weird situations could happen. Man, that irritated me. That drove that. Like I said, I'm not going to name the guy's name, but it definitely drove a wedge between us that we really didn't like each other after that. Because I was like, wow, that's pretty fucked up of you to just not really care about your airmen that much. Yeah. I mean, we're getting talking convoys of trucks. We're talking 30, 40, 50 semis, plus the combat units, the Army units and Marine units that are escorting them in. You're talking anywhere from a minimum of 20 trucks to 100, 150. That's a lot of vehicles. And if you're not paying attention, have your earbuds in and walk out and don't know something's coming in. I don't know. It's crazy.
The best leaders were the ones that understood that there are some lower ranking people that know more than them about certain situations, right? Like I respected like those senior NCOs, for example, that could go to like an NCO, like a lower tier NCO and say, hey, how is this done? Or maybe that officer that deployed and it's their first deployment. And then the NCO is deployed 3 times and they say, hey, how is this done? Like they're looking, the pride doesn't get to them, right? They're looking at someone lower ranking and recognizing they've seen more action than I have. I'm going to ask them questions and I'm going to go to them. And, I respected that a lot more. And I think that story is an example of that. Like you knew better and you knew that was risky, but the arrogance of the NCO, he just, well, it's my rule. So just respect my rule and you don't get to overstep. But this is like a serious thing. This is actually life or death type of stuff. This isn't a contest. It's
absolutely
very
yeah.
valid a very valid point that you were making.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that. Definitely makes a good leader. I saw a lot of that from good leaders throughout my career too, especially being security forces. In Scott Air Force Base, where I was stationed, my second base, we had guard and reserve there, and they would augment our forces. I saw a lot of that. I actually saw a lot of good examples there, where the senior NCOs that were active duty only had certain experience. But some of the civilian cops that worked there, or some of the reserve guys were civilian cops on the outside, and they understood that a lot of those guys had very unique skills. They were seeing a lot more police action. They had a lot more hands-on training, and they really utilized that. They kind of figured out what everybody's skill set was, because you could have an airman first class or senior airman that's been he could be 35 years old and been a civilian police officer for 15 years.
Exactly.
And the wealth of knowledge that they have could really bring a lot to the career field, instead of just dismissing them as, they're just an E3, no big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, well, they have unique skills. So, but let's get into the book here, because I want to take it section by section, or part, as you put it in there. And I kind of just want to get your thoughts on a couple of different sections, because I think they're really unique for certain reasons. But in part 1, you have functioning but not fine. Mm-hmm. And I guess my thoughts on that, and then I'll let you kind of take it away with what your thoughts are, because I don't want to give away the whole book. So I kind of just pick some sections. I know for me personally, and I know for a lot of people out there, the world seems like it's functioning fine. Like, you've got everything going on. You're killing it in your job. You're doing this, you're doing that. But at the same time, like, what people don't see is behind the scenes, you have thoughts. Some people have nightmares. I'm fortunate enough that I don't really have nightmares, but you just never know when that trigger could be. But it looks like your whole world's together. I think a lot of times people look at people with PTSD as their whole world is falling apart. They're aggressive, they're violent, they're beating people, they've got substance abuse issues, and it's not really the case. And that, like, really hit home for me, because I know if I'm kind of that same way sometimes, most of the time I'm functioning fine. Sometimes I'm functioning, but I'm not fine. So what's your thoughts? If you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, that is one of my favorite chapters, I think, that I wrote, because I just had a lot of frustration with the whole stigma that, like you said, if you have a job, you have a family, things from the outside seem to be, running smooth for them, so therefore they're fine. They're all right. They're not mentally ill. And I'm just saying that's not true. Like, and that's actually what inspired me to name my blog what I did. My blog is called Functionally Mental, like, for that very reason. And I like to go into how the majority of us that are mentally ill, like a large percentage, are actually working and appear to be fine, and no one would even know, like, any better, because it's an invisible wound. It's mental illness. So from the outside looking in, everything's okay. And the issue with that stigma is it's used to validate, like, a lot of people's mental illnesses and experiences. I've personally dealt with that. I remember quite a few times where I came back from my deployment and I kind of hinted that there was some issues going on to coworkers and friends, and it was always kind of met with the whole, "Oh, but you're fine. You're successful. You did this, you did that. You're fine." And that got thrown at me quite a bit, and it almost makes you insane sometimes, because you start to wonder, like, am I fine? I'm dealing with all these symptoms. I'm dealing with this when I get home from work, crying spells, irritability, anxiousness, nightmares, whatever else is going on. And yet everyone in the world is telling me I'm fine because I got a job and, I'm just going through the motions, and again, the stigma of mental illness, the old school stigma is, if you're mentally ill, you're locked up in a psych ward or something, right? But that's not really the case. That's why outpatient exists, like, in the first place. The majority of us, we could be mentally ill and suffering from it, but at the same time doing what we have to do to get by, like, in society. And I'm just cautioning people against the whole, just don't assume. Don't assume anything. You could see people, you could think they look fine, but you don't actually know what they're suffering through. I mean, I guess, yeah, that's what that chapter is really about.
Yeah, there's I think it's easy to look at somebody who has all their stuff together and just think that they're fine. Oh, look, they've been in business this long, they've got this much success, they're married, they got kids, like everything looks perfect. Well, how many people do you really think on your Facebook friends feed or Instagram feed that looks like their world is perfect? It's not. Whether or not they have mental health issues or not, their life is not perfect. Take the people who are take all that time to post whatever pictures, whatever their thing is on Instagram, right? All that time to find the location and the posing and the photographer to do all. That's a lot of stress. That's a lot of stuff. Like they're balancing a lot just to make that happen. Like, and so you got to look past what you see and think, they may not be fine. And the reason I wanted to bring that up because I think it hits home for a lot of people, but I think it's also an opportunity to have a conversation, with in the veteran community that people can look like they're functioning, but they're not. They're functioning, but they're not fine. And that is why we need to check in on our battle buddies.
Yes.
Even the ones that seem like they're fine. If somebody goes through something traumatic and you see it, they lose somebody close to them, or something's going on in their life, that shouldn't be the only time you reach out to them. And I'm preaching to myself here, right? I've been that guy that will reach out to some battle buddies when I know they're struggling and they got some things going on and check on them every now and then. But if I'm checking on them once every 5 years when something bad happens, like I said, I'm going to call myself out on this. I got to do a better job as well. But we all have to do a better job. Reach out to those people you have contact with. I don't even care if you put it in your schedule, right? Pick 10 of your closest battle buddies, and every week you call a different one. At least you're contacting that same person once every 10 weeks or 12 weeks or 4 weeks. I don't care. They say it on Vet TV, and I love it at the end of a lot of their shows. Pick up the phone and text somebody, call somebody, check on your battle buddies, and I got to challenge myself the same way. I know life gets in the way and crazy things go on. And it's, but you got to find a way to like check on some people every now and then. I feel like in myself, like in some ways, Clubhouse, we met on Clubhouse. There's a lot of veteran groups, a lot of vets talking on Clubhouse. And I think that's another way that those conversations are happening. We're at least having conversations. We at least know that, oh, hey, look, so-and-so jumped in. Oh, man, I haven't talked to them in a few weeks. It's glad to know that they're still okay. They're still doing fine. They're still here. They're talking with us. At least they're checking into the community, if you will, the veteran community, in some way, shape, or form.
Clubhouse has been so good for veterans.
Yeah, I know. I won't go into the stories, but I've pinged you in some rooms. I'm sure you've been pinged into like 10 million others where somebody's having like a breakdown and they've got serious things going on in their life and they just need somebody. I know the last time I did it, I pinged you in there. They needed some like VSO type services as well. So I pinged Jane in there, and both of you eventually got in there and got the person the help they needed. Got them pointed in the right direction, which is, at the end of the day, it's what we should be doing as a veteran community.
Yeah, that's
why checking on people and making sure that they're fine and getting the work, getting what they need so they can get from not fine to functioning and fine.
Yeah, and peer-to-peer support is so beneficial. And on the topic too, by the way, so many people have told me, well, they seem fine because they're working like 60 plus hours a week. And I just have to say, that is not a good sign. I know a lot of people, especially in America, we see that as a good sign if you're excessively working, but it's actually the opposite. I mean, I had a whole chat room on avoidance, and a very common tactic for emotional avoidance is excessive work. So I just want to reiterate, that does not mean someone is fine because they're obsessively working 60 plus hours a week, and that means they're functional, therefore they're fine. Again, like
well, that's that's one of the reasons I thought they were important chapters and or important parts in the chapters and the parts, however however you want to call it, because a lot of these spoke to me because I'm the same way. I'm the kind of person that works my butt off in business. I'm a full-time student. Um, I've achieved industry awards locally about 2 years ago. And sometimes when I look at it on the wall now, I look at it and I'm sad. I shouldn't be. You know, it was one of those awards that there's only one per year. In my local association, there's 750 people, and I was able, I didn't even see it coming. And I was, I'm proud of it because I put in the work.
Mm-hmm.
But what was the cost?
Yeah.
And that's what I look at, and I'm like, wow, what it is Realtor of the Year. And I look at the names of the other people on there, and mad respect for all those people in my industry. They have earned it, and they felt honored enough to bestow that upon me, and that's great. And I'm proud to have been Realtor of the Year in 2019. But I look at it and I'm like, wow, what did it cost me? It cost me time with my family. It cost me a lot of work. Why did I get it? Well, it wasn't just for the number of houses I sell. It's for volunteering, because I was sitting on 5, 6, 7 different committees a year at the local level, and the board of directors, and all these other things, and volunteer stuff. And I'm that kind of person. Lead us right into the next chapter I was going to talk about, was superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just work. It's volunteering. It's this. It's taking care of my family. It's all these different things, like nonstop. I don't stop. I get in my office at 8:00 in the morning. Sometimes I'm here at midnight. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I'll leave my office at 8. Sometimes, honestly, I'll quit working at 4 or 5, but I'll still sit in my office and alienate myself and play video games. And as I read through those two parts, because I put both of them in there, superhuman and alienation, I realized that I'm definitely not alone. And I realized that there was some reasons there that I didn't realize for years until this last year, and especially reading your book. And it was like, aha moment, like a light bulb going off. Like, wow, that's totally me. That's totally me. And I know there's other people, and it all kind of just fits. Because I wanted to talk about those in that order: functioning but not fine, superhuman, and alienation.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know, like, all of those make it look like you're successful, that you're functioning and fine. So what are your thoughts on, I guess, the superhuman thing and the alienation thing? Because I know those are extremely common.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's funny. I was told by a colleague, even when I came back home from the deployment, like, wow, you're the first person I've seen come back home and you're exactly the same. That was the observation. And at the time I took it as a compliment. So I was, thinking, oh, whatever. I got through it. I'm strong, blah, blah, blah. Unchanged. But it was really not the case. It was an act. And I don't know if I should be ashamed or proud of the fact that I acted so well that no one knew that I was traumatized. Even I didn't know it at the time. But it was just, like I said, it was that facade. It was that, and it's feeding into the stigma we were talking about at the beginning of the podcast. Like, don't let them see what's really going on with you. And the military teaches very well, because we're expected to be very stoic and to just keep going on with this mission, and all the work that goes with it, and being functional, doing everything you're supposed to do. And we become proud of that, and it's really not healthy in any way, shape, or form, emotionally, mentally, physically. And that's why I wrote Superhuman, because I'm trying to explain to veterans, who got out but were still in that mode, that military mode, that this isn't healthy. This was never healthy. It's something that we were indoctrinated into because we needed it for the military. But now that we're out, we have to understand it's going to wear and tear on us really fast. And burnout is a thing. And no matter how much you want to be, and no matter how well trained you are, you're a human. And there are real consequences to this pace that you're trying to keep up. And I hope that point, I was able to make that point in that chapter.
Yeah, it really spoke to me because, I think burnout's very real. When you, and it's not just like one thing, it's just like everything. Like myself personally, I hate to kind of bring it back to that, but I just realized over this last year, that I got to take some more time for quality of life for myself. I got to get rid of stress because I realized what stress was starting to do to my body, not just my mind, but my body.
Mhm.
And I started taking a look at, okay, what kind of quality of life things can I do? Right? Just got back from a family vacation, the longest vacation my family's ever taken. It was awesome. It was wonderful. I came back actually recharged and ready to go. Like, it's amazing what just a vacation does, right? Like, take the time. And the best thing we did is we did all the dishes, all the laundry before we left. We left everything clean. So we didn't come back to, like, a little bit, because I've got two kids, tons of laundry. So it's like everything was caught up, ready to go. We came back home. It was clean. It was ready to go. Just get right back into life, right? Not like you got to wash all the clothes from vacation, all that fun, all that work that actually comes from coming back from vacation, back putting the bags away and all that stuff. But like that quality of life and just being away, different environment, not working. I'm fortunate enough to have a business partner that was able to cover things for me. All I really had to do was check my emails.
Yeah.
20 minutes a day, 30 minutes a day. The rest of the day was with my family, going to museums, going on trips, hanging out with family, because, there's a lot of family where we went to. And it was amazing, like what that kind of does. And it reiterates why you got to stop being superhuman. You
Mhm.
can't just put everything on your shoulders, because
Yeah.
other people can help you. Just ask for the help, right? Take those 2 or 3 things that somebody else can honestly do and delegate that to somebody, or get rid of them. I did that about a month ago. Another thing I was involved in, HOA president. By the way, never do that. Never get involved in your HOA. I had a great time, and I've learned a lot over the last years, and wonderful neighbors. So it's not that bad. But as being president for 6 years, I had enough, and it was putting stress on me. I was so burnt out at that job, I had to give it up.
Yeah.
And I gave the board an ultimatum. I said, somebody takes my job, or I don't seek re-election as a regular board member. Like, I'm done. Like, I'm walking away. Like, I will give you all the records and everything in 2 weeks. Like, that's the point I was at, because I was like, I don't care. I'll take 2 more weeks of work and get everything put together, but something has to come off my plate. I
Something
can't keep doing
good.
this anymore.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm proud of you, because
Well, that's, and I say that not to kind of toot my own horn, but like, so other people in that boat, like, just get rid of that shit. Whatever's on your plate that you really like are burned out on, or you're starting to feel burned out on, get rid of it. Dump that shit like a sack of hot potatoes.
learn to, especially veterans, because like what we've been talking about, we're taught to be so mission orientated that we don't know how to see the value in time off. And that's something I'm thinking more about. I've been thinking more about lately since I resigned from the VA. Like, there's just as much value in our days off as there is in the days we're working, but we don't ever see it that way. There's been so many times I had days off and I'm just stir crazy. I'm like, oh, I need to work. I need to do something. I'm wasting my time. And no, it's not a waste of time. Days off serve a very important purpose. And unless we start seeing it that way, we're always going to be work obsessed. And then the burnout's going to happen. So that's what I encourage for people, especially if you're a veteran and you're still in that military mode, superhuman mode. Like, you eventually, I'm hoping you learn to see the value, like in your days off.
Yeah.
In our
So do I, because I'm just now, it's been 10 years since I got out, and I'm just now kind of seeing that, right? Like, what am I doing for my quality of life, for, to unwind and just like disconnect from certain things. Another thing that even helped on vacation, my wife flat out told me, I don't know if this is a veteran thing or just me, but she flat out told me before we left, she goes, look, we're going for X amount of days. You will not micromanage everything we do. Because I was the kind of guy, look, go on a trip. We went to Denver and we drove. It was about 13, 14 hours. We split it up. We stayed about halfway. I'm the kind of person that will look at the number of miles, the speed limit, and determine, okay, we're going to stop every hour and a half to let the kids go to the bathroom and stretch. We'll be at the rest stop for 15 minutes. We'll be at this particular rest stop at this. I would literally micromanage everything down to the minute, or to the 5 minutes. Like, and she flat out told me, she goes, we're just going to wing it. Here's a list of things that we can do when we're in town. There's some family we're going to catch up with, and we're just going to go. The only thing she let me do was book the hotel room on the way there. So we knew exactly where we were spending the night. and that was it. And it was really, really hard the whole trip to wake up in the morning and not be like, well, let's roll out of the door at 10 o'clock. It's a 35-minute drive across town and we can check in by, and that was really, really hard for me to do.
Valuable intervention for you.
Extremely valuable. And so thank you to my wife. She's probably upstairs watching this as we record it. But while it was hard to do, it was actually kind of like empowering to just be like, we're just gonna go with the flow.
It's liberating.
Now, I didn't master it, right? Like there were still days in the morning where everybody's like sleeping in, and I'm just like, I got all this energy in the world. Like, oh well, what are we gonna do today? I don't know. We'll just go pick a place on the list and go do it. But like I was out of bed, showered, ready to go, like every morning, like well before everybody else, because I was excited, and that was another thing that like just was weird to me, like just being that excited about a trip and going and doing things and that quality of life, and it was just like you said, invigorating. Like it's wild, and I felt like being the superhuman for so many years, that felt good. It really felt good, and I hate to dive so much into myself, but if it helps somebody realize, like, just stop what you're doing. Just take a freaking vacation, right? I don't even care if it's 3 days. Go somewhere, shut off your phone, check away from work, go with your family, don't even have any plans. Book the hotel room and just find something to do. Go hike, go to a museum, go to an art festival, whatever. Just go sit on a park bench all 3 days. Whatever works for you, just go do something.
Go that control, like for real. Everyone thinks I've been a little crazy lately, and what I mean by that is I resigned in February from the VA, and it's just now, like tomorrow I start this new job. So I've had about 5 months of being unemployed and just focusing on promoting the book. And a lot of people are kind of looking at me like, what are you doing, Elisa? Like they don't realize this was on purpose. This break was on purpose, and the whole waking up without a plan some days was actually on purpose for me. I was really challenging myself to like embrace, the break, the freedom, the not knowing what the future was going to be, the lack of control. And anytime I had fear in that, I just kept challenging myself to let go of that need to have a plan right away. And so like some people thought I was a little crazy, I would say, because it wasn't like me to ever do anything like that, but it was exactly what I needed.
Well, it's not like you because you were conditioned for so many years to act like a robot, like a superhuman.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to break it down. I think it was about 3/4 of the way through the book. You mentioned, maybe it was in part 3, maybe it was end of part 2. I don't remember, but there's a part in there where you kind of talk about that. Like you go to, actually, I think it was Culture Shock. That was the other one I had on here, where you go to basic training and you're indoctrinated into the military, customs and courtesies and all this stuff. Like you're trained to fit into the culture. But when you get out, all they do, and your situation was similar to mine, right? Create a resume and some classes on budgeting, and that's basically it. Like 2 weeks of nonsense, death by PowerPoint to get out of the military, where it took you, well, when I was in, it was 6.5 weeks Air Force basic training. I know Army's longer. I know the Marine Corps is like 13.5 weeks or something. But you have weeks and weeks where every moment your life is managed. You have specific things to do. You completely indoctrinate yourself into that culture. And that transition program is still in that culture. It's still, hey, we're starting at 9 o'clock. And it's not like civilian meetings, which a 9 o'clock meeting starts at 9:15. Like, there's still a 9 o'clock meeting, so you better be in your seat at 8:45 because we're starting at 8:50.
Yeah.
There's no, because it's military. I can't remember. Well, I guess it was a civilian that ran mine. I don't know who's running all of them, but you're still in that culture. You're still on that base. And my personal thought is those transition programs should be at strange hours, outside the duty day, maybe even on weekends. Like change up the culture. Get them off base. Have it in a
Yeah.
hotel. Have people show up not in, I can't remember. I probably went in uniform. I don't know if we had to go in civilian clothes, but maybe people show up in business casual at a hotel off base on a weekend and wipe the whole damn thing clean of anything military.
Right. There's nothing.
You say you start at 9:00, specifically start the fucking program at 9:15. Start it late, because when you get into the civilian boardroom, it's going to be the same way. You're going to have people coming in late and they're going to be on their cell phones and they're going to be slouching back in the chair.
Yep.
And they should be planting people in there to do some of that stuff. Right? To like let people know, like, the outside world is not what you're used to, whether you did 4 years or 20. And for those that did 20 and are in the E9, E8, E9 range, E7, you know, or the colonels and the generals, when they're getting out, like, they're really going to be in for a culture shock.
Oh my gosh.
Like, that's got to be insane. I mean, I was only in for 5.5 years. And when I still got out, like, obviously there's a lot of things that still I kind of did for, well, still doing 10 years later. And, you know, that's got to change. That was another part in part 2 that really spoke to me, because I've talked about transition a lot and culture shock. When you kind of brought it right back around to getting out, that's huge. So I'll stop speaking on it. What are your thoughts on how things are done and the culture shock? Because it was an awesome part.
I mean, I just wanted to say, I can't even fathom how some people do 20 plus years, first of all. Like, imagine they've been in it the longest, and then they're getting out and dealing with the changes that I already know how that transition feels. So that in itself is kind of scary to me. But no, nothing can really prepare us psychologically for that transition, I believe. And it's just kind of scary. Like, I reflect back, and anyone that I know that's enlisting, it's like I'm proud of them, but there's like this pain. I can't help but feel this pain in my heart, you know, just knowing what they're probably about to go through. But then knowing anyone who's in and they're about to get out, I feel that same, you know, in my heart, like, oh man, they're about to get out. And but it's just something you can't really explain to someone until they go through. I was just, you know, I had a plan. There's a lot of veterans that have plans. You know, they get out and it sounds foolproof and it sounds like it's going to work out. But again, psychologically, nothing really can prepare us for just how dramatically different the civilian lifestyle is and the disconnect that we're going to feel because of it, because we're still militarized. We're still, you know, think about however many years it took for us to be that military person that we became. That's a lot of undoing, and people don't, you know, give Cheetah this cat, like, people don't give it the credit that it deserves. People paying attention to that, they think, oh, you're out now, you know, you could just switch. No, we're psychologically not out. You know, we're still in that mindset and that mentality. It's a whole different world that we got accustomed to. The civilian world is nothing like it. And yes, we were civilians before we were in the military. It doesn't matter. We got conditioned to the military. And once we're
Well, it's
out,
a different view too, because if we talk lifers, 20 years, whatever, most of them probably went in at 18, maybe 22, you know, if they got their degree and went the officer route. But your first 18 years of your life, you're a child.
mm-hmm.
You have virtually no responsibilities until you're, say, maybe 14, 15, start getting part-time jobs mowing the lawn for the neighbor, you know, or work flipping burgers at McDonald's. And so by the time you're 18, what do you really know about life?
Right.
Grown up life and paying bills and responsibilities and having kids and jobs and careers and all this. You don't know any of that. Resumes. You even hinted it in your book that, you know, your first resume through that transition program was military bullet point style, which probably 90% of them are.
2.5 pages too. They have 2.5 page long ass bullet styled resume. It was horrible.
probably a bunch of abbreviations, and you're definitely not alone on that. Mine was probably pretty much the same. But, you know, it's people, I can't remember the words you used in the book, but you kind of talk about like civilians just saying, well, you're out of the military now. You're not doing that anymore. Just change. Like, just just drop it. You're in a civilian world. You got to play by those rules. Well, it's hard to do when you've been, like basic training every second of your day is dictated for you.
Yeah.
Right. If you think back, like, what do you do in your downtime in basic training? You don't have any, because you're clipping strings on your uniform or polishing your boots or shoes. Well, that might age me a little bit, polishing the boots, but spent a lot of time doing it. The boots, the shoes, clipping uniforms, making sure there's 2 finger links between the hangers in the closet, in the locker there. Is my sheets flat? Like, every second you're busy.
Yeah.
And that's where probably where the superhuman kind of comes in. You're trained to operate on very little sleep. Everything needs to be perfect. You're going to handle everything yourself, because you might get a little help here and there, but that's where they build that culture, and they build it over a few weeks, and it's reinforced over 4 years, 10 years, 20 years. You can't get rid of that. My stepfather's been out of the military for 50 years. He's a Vietnam vet. There's still certain things he does. If I sat and watched him long enough, I could probably in an hour pick out a half dozen things that he does that I know are holdovers from his time in the military.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get rid of it. It's a lifetime thing. You just have to learn how to adapt certain things and how to stop certain things. And I don't know that there's a right way or wrong way, but what's your take on that?
Well, like I'm trying to remember which chapter it was where it's adjustment, not readjustment. Talking about how the concept of readjustment is kind of ridiculous in my opinion, and I know I'll offend people when I say that because it's preached, right? Readjustment. No, you can't readjust back to your old self after going through military training, the whatever job that you're placed in, and if you've deployed, like even more so, there's no readjusting. It's actually a bunch of adjustments that you're going through over time, very dramatic adjustments it's actually difficult psychologically to go through that. And, we're just not thinking of it that way because we're military members and it becomes our norm. But, those things stick, those experiences stay with us. And, upon getting out, like I said, they don't just go away. But I had talked about all the different phases that we may go through in the military. And I'm reiterating that, hey, the point is not to fight these things when you get out and you become a civilian. The point is just to recognize it for what it is. You went through all these adjustments, and now you're going to have to go through even more adjustments after you get out. And I'm trying to combat the shame of that, because I've noticed a lot of us feel like once we get out, we're going to be able to adapt easily, or at least that's what we hope. And then there's so many veterans I've worked with, and I went through this myself, where we're kind of ashamed because we didn't adapt as well as we thought we would, because we're thinking, oh, we did all this stuff in the military, we we know how to work hard, we know how to get through anything, adapt, overcome, like Clint Eastwood says in Heartbreak Ridge. But then this is a whole different world and culture, so it's not going to be the same type of adjustment or adaptation. It's going to be that the personality we've developed and the person we became doesn't mesh into this new culture and this new civilian environment. And now we're going to have to undo these habits that were so good for us in the DoD, but now they're actually hindering us in the civilian world, and they're causing these clashes, and we're getting in arguments with our civilian coworkers and maybe our family and everything, because we're so set on this way. It worked for us so well, but now we're out, and no one wants to deal with that. No one wants to deal with what we've become, as military members.
Yeah, because for us, it's such a unique experience because it's our experience. We lived it. We learned it, those skills, tasks, whatever, the way to live. But we have to keep in mind that we're a very, very, very small percentage of the population, roughly 1% or what everybody keeps saying. And so almost everybody you see on the street is a civilian. They have no clue what you go through. You have no clue what the culture really is in the military. I mean, you're an Air Force vet. How many times does somebody come up to you when they find out you're Air Force and ask what plane you flew?
Yeah.
You know, my response was always, I don't fly on planes. You know, it was me sitting in the truck guarding it and making sure nobody did anything stupid, play, so that the maintainers could keep it fixed and get it flying. Really, the flying jobs in the Air Force are relatively small percentage of the Air Force, very, very small. And or you walk around in your uniform. I don't know how it is. Well, it's probably worse now with the multicam, but the ABUs that we were wearing. Well, the Army had the ACUs at the same time. So it's probably about the same, I guess. You always get called soldier. Everybody's a soldier to civilians. It doesn't matter if you have got a Marine Corps uniform on or a Navy uniform. Like to us, they're like so drastically different, right? I mean, the Marines can blend into anything. We could just blend into a pile of rocks like the Army. And the Navy could just get lost in the water with their blue uniforms. It's just such a unique experience, but civilians they just don't know and understand. Like they have no clue what the culture is or what we go through, what we do, or perfect example, your college professor, that you talk about in the book and how she thought everybody had the same job. But talk about the security forces and gate guard, like, thinking everybody did one particular job in the Air Force. Like what career in this world does everybody do the same job? You think everybody at Caterpillar Tractors puts tires on things? Because if they did, who's running things? Who's running the machines? Who's putting the buckets on the front? Like not everybody's doing the same damn job. Like that's just ridiculous. It was funny reading that, by the way.
So, like the way she looked at us, because we're just sitting straight and just glaring at her PowerPoint, and she was so scared of us. She was
I could picture it as I was reading it.
Why are you guys looking at me like this? Like that military discipline we had, listening to a teacher, and we're all just sitting up, and like we're in boot camp, and she like she legit ended class early sometimes because it scared her so much, and she just had. And then there's those few civilian students sprinkling in on base to join us, but they're like half passed out at their desks. Like the rest of us are just sitting up glaring.
Yeah, it's definitely a different world. I mean, I didn't. I took a couple college classes when I was in, but being in college the last couple of years, there's been times, well, not this last year and a half, I guess, but before that, for about a year and a half before that, actually going to classes at a local junior college. Now, we have a lot of military presence here, but I was usually clearly 10 years older than everybody else in the room. And it was funny as I was reading that because I'm thinking back to some of these classes, and I'm like, I always sat in front. I was almost always front and center, close to the professor where I could ask questions and I could hear clearly what he was saying because, bad hearing. And I wanted to be able to see the board clearly, hear him clearly, him be able to hear me if I have a question, make it known that I'm in the class. And as I'm reading that, and I'm just like, yeah, I know that was me, even if it was death by PowerPoint. Like I was always paying attention to what's going on, trying to take notes, trying to be the best student I could. And I look around and there's people in the back with their feet propped up and people that are sleeping. Some people get out and leave class early. Some dude in the back eating a bag of potato chips, and the professor just doesn't care. Yeah. And it's like, well, no wonder they liked me when I talked to him afterwards because I was asking questions. I was following up with stuff. What I didn't know about. Everybody else is just boom, they're out of there.
Interested. Wow.
Yeah, I was like, wow, I got a captive audience here. I got 50 people in this room, and one of them's actually interested in what I'm saying. Yeah, I'm only interested because I just want to pass the class, But yeah, no, it was very, very interesting reading that, and humorous almost, because I was just thinking of my experiences there. So, the last part, we'll move into part 3 now. And this was an interesting one. You had it, I think it was titled, "I Don't Want to Live Anymore," where you talk about, people seeking help. And I thought it was really interesting how you kind of point this out. Are you like, I'm trying to remember how you, I guess I wrote it down. Do you want to die or do you want to live with less pain? something like that you put in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's probably where the trigger warning comes in here. What did you see as a social worker? Because I found that really, really interesting, because I think it's a very to the point question to ask somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's also mental health training. We get comfortable very early on learning how to ask hard questions, and especially if we become a clinician. There's no more beating around the bush with that topic. We just directly ask it, and that question in particular is important to me, because it's giving me the answer that I really need. I need to see, is there still hope, with this person? And the majority of people don't want to die. They want to live with less pain. And that's why I clarify that. Like, okay, you want to live with less pain, and now we have to figure out how can we do this for you? How can you do this for yourself? How can you get past this hopeless moment, so that you can restore that hope again? And we got to safety plan it, we got to action plan it, and it's just all a part of the difficult conversations that are necessary when someone is experiencing suicidal ideation. Fortunate, I had to help hospitalize a lot of people when I was in the military. But fortunately, when I was working for the VA, I did not have to hospitalize any of my clients. I got clients that went out of inpatient because they were suicidal and then saw me for outpatient. So I received clients that were just getting out of inpatient, and they still needed to work on those ideations because they were there, and I helped them restore hope. But fortunately, none of my clients, I didn't have to hospitalize any of them. And we were able to work through those suicidal ideations that they had. And, sometimes a part of that was medication too. And the psychiatrists did an incredible job. And I liked working in conjunction with them. Um, and it's just, it's a lot. It takes a lot to do that type of work. It's delicate, it's intricate. Um, and I caution people against sweeping it under the rug, because there are some people that are so scared to talk about suicide that they're not asking those important questions. And just, as a clinician, you have to go there with people. You have to go deep enough to know, where is this coming from? What can we do to try to pull you out of this? Because if you just try to ignore it, or you try to say, no, 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 you're not suicidal, you'll be okay, that's not going to fix the problem. What can we do to get you from being someone that's thinking about harming themselves to someone that does not want that anymore? So I take it very seriously. Like I wrote in the book, a client of ours did commit suicide when I was in Afghanistan. And, that's a moral injury that will stick with me forever. So I take it even more seriously now. And I'm just glad that this new job that I have, it's research, and it's for suicide prevention. It's researching Air Force suicides. It's, looking at the themes that led up to the suicide. And I just think this is great. I've worked with this in the military. I've worked with it for the VA, and now I get to work in the research side of things, and help, like, focus more on this suicide prevention. This is a real problem.
Well, I can't wait to hear, what you can tell me about the research, as all the future conversations we'll have on Clubhouse or whatever. But, my goal with this podcast is, it's not specifically suicide. But I noticed that a lot of people would post in Facebook groups all the issues that they're dealing with. Sometimes it leads to suicide, sometimes it doesn't. But it was really screaming out to me. What I noticed was people are having problems, and there's not a way to fix the actual problem, right? I'm sure you had, a wide range of issues that you're dealing with: financial issues, PTSD, substance abuse. I mean, relationships, all these different things, right? That could lead somebody down the rabbit hole of, spiraling to the permanent solution to a temporary problem. But where's the fix to the problem? And so that's what my thoughts were on the Battle Buddy podcast. Is let's create a podcast and let's talk about certain things. And, like having you on here, right? We're talking about it. We're also promoting your book, which is also another tool, another resource to help people get out of things. But my goal is always to have like that actionable thing as well, to pull something out that's actionable. And so that's a very direct question that you ask somebody, are you suicidal, or you just want to live with less pain? So the actionable question I've got for you to follow up on this: those of us that are not in a mental health profession, whether we run into somebody on Clubhouse or we run into them on the street, if there appears to be some sort of a problem where we need to ask some sort of question like that, assuming it's somebody that you kind of know at least a little bit, how should somebody ask that question?
Oh, yeah, I should say that's a question specifically for clinical work. But really, if you know someone and they're, talking about being suicidal or having ideation, I'm always going to encourage that you get them to help, that you try your best to get them to help. And it's still a scary thing. This is a question that comes up a lot. Like, what do I do if someone's suicidal? I have no idea. And remember your role. Like, if you're their family member, you're their family member. If you're their friend, you're their friend. Just be that. Don't think that you have to become a therapist. Just know, be their friend. Get them to help. Be their family member. Get them to the professional. And if that means, hey, I'll walk with you to the clinic, great. That means, if you're far away from them, if that means I'll text you every so many hours and make sure that you get that help, that's great. In the military, it was great too when I saw the first sergeants that were willing to tell them, hey, you can go to mental health and get help, I'll walk you to the clinic. So just remember, whatever your role is, that's your role. Don't burden yourself with extra roles, and help them get to that resource that they need. And be that person that they know they can talk to judgment free until they get handed off to the professional.
So would it be better to just say, if you notice somebody might be having a hard time, just say something like, hey, I see you might be struggling, is there any way I can help? Would that be maybe a more of appropriate, non-social worker, psychiatrist, kind of way of handling things? And then, if they say that they, need some help or kind of give you something, then you can kind of go off of that. Like, I've got the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, which is 800-273-8255, scrolling at the bottom here, if anybody happens to need it. But, to point them towards those resources, or nonprofits like Hick Strong is a nonprofit I know of, where they give some free counseling to people needing it, and all kinds of different things. So is that probably the best way to handle things? Just kind of ask if there's anything you can help them with?
Yeah, point them to whatever resources that you know about. Validate whatever it is versus trying to sweep it under the rug. And, just letting them know that, being an empathetic listener is huge. And so keep in mind, a lot of people are going to be resistant. That's normal. Some people could be resistant to help for years and years, but they don't really forget who was that empathetic listener for them. And those are the people that they tend to go back to when they have questions or concerns. And, it builds on itself. Those types of things, they may or may not get help when they need it, but they remember like who was there and who was validating them and being empathetic in their time of need. And when you build that trust with someone, they're likely to go to you again, when they need something. And, just, we can't make people get treatment, but we could certainly like give those nice subtle reminders every now and then, like, hey, don't forget, there's these resources when you're ready, if you're ready. And and if a lot of veterans now are opening nonprofits to help other veterans, or on Clubhouse and playing a good peer-to-peer role. That's what the Unseen is about. Like, for my show on Clubhouse, it's peer-to-peer more than anything else. I want us to help each other. I want I don't know everything. I specialize in mental health, but every time we have a chat room, there's so many veterans, and they have a wealth of knowledge that they can share with other veterans, and we all get to leave that chat knowing more about what's available to us.
Oh, that's the beauty of those chats, because you get a certain number of people in there, and somebody sometimes people don't break down, but sometimes you get somebody that breaks down, and needs a little bit of help, and then they kind of start telling their story. And the beautiful thing that I've noticed is that maybe you know somebody, or LJ does, or I know somebody that might be able to help them. What do? We start pinging them into the room, or because you got your Instagram or your Twitter connected. Whoops, just lost her there for a second. We'll see if she comes back. But as I was saying, in these rooms, in these clubhouse rooms, you have an opportunity to just kind of connect people, and kind of point them in the right direction, and get certain people pinged in there, or point them in the right direction with a DM. I've done that a few times, trying to point somebody in the right direction. So you got to go get those resources here, and we'll see if Elisa comes back. I had the final 3 questions for her. Maybe she's trying to avoid them. We're gonna go to take a real quick break here. All right, I don't know where Lisa went. She's not responding to my message. Maybe she had an internet connection issue. So we're going to go ahead and wrap this up unless she pops back up here in the next couple of seconds. But thanks for tuning in. Hope you've really enjoyed this episode. You really need to connect with Elisa. Once again, it's elisaescalante.com. You can go check out her book. It's available on Amazon. Take it from me. It's hard to put into words what this book really does. It's so simple and easy to read. None of the chapters are super long. It's something that you can digest. You could read a chapter every morning with your breakfast. It's just way too easy to kind of read through this book. And it puts it in such a unique perspective that's not, like I said earlier in the show, not super clinical, in a way. It's from her perspective, her thoughts, easy to digest. And I think it's something that every veteran should read. It is on my book list on battlebuddypodcast.net. It's up there because I've read it. I don't put anything up there unless I have read it and know the author, because I feel that it's valuable and important. So that's why it's on there. That's why I had Elisa come on the podcast, because she's been an incredible resource on Clubhouse, an incredible friend, incredible battle buddy. I love the fact that I've connected with her and what she's trying to do, because it just fits with what a lot of us are trying to do in the veteran community, and that's bring more awareness to mental health, bring more awareness to the suicide problem, but most importantly, try and find ways to fix them. In this, I think her book gives a little bit of an insight where people can kind of understand. And I think understanding and opening up eyes is the first step in kind of getting on that path to healing, to understanding what your problems and issues are, and then going to counseling and figure out ways to get past those. You're never going to end triggers. You're never going to end PTSD. You're never going to be over it. You're never going to be healed. But you can try and find ways to mitigate the impacts of triggers, to get past certain things, to realize what your triggers are, to avoid those, certain things like that. And so it's a really good book for that. But more importantly, and I told her this before the show, this book is an absolute must read for any family member with a veteran with PTSD. Any one of them. This is the book for that. Hands down, it will open up their eyes to what is going on in the veteran community and what their veteran is feeling or experiencing. And when they can kind of step into the boots a little bit and have a little bit of an idea what's going on inside their mind, and it can help in understanding, bridge that communication gap a little bit when somebody can know and understand a little bit more. Never going to fully understand, but you can definitely understand a little bit more. So highly encourage it. Go get Elisa's book. With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you all for tuning in.